An anime doesn't need to be longer than half an hour to create a memorable experience. In fact, you can watch all 15 of today's anime in under 4 hours. As a part of my upcoming Beginner's Guide to 1960s Anime, I wanted to include Osamu Tezuka's experimental works. However, I felt they'd be lost in the crowd of much larger and more popular anime. Instead, I'll be covering each of these experimental anime from 1962 to 2014 in today's video. Osamu Tezuka is one of the most prolific names in anime and manga, spawning countless hits such as Astro Boy, Dororo, Blackjack, and many more. He's a creative savant and visionary who shotgunned a myriad of stories, piquing his readers' imagination and conveying his criticisms of the world. Today's experimental anime embody his artistic integrity and love for crafting short stories free from the shackles of profit. Although I prefer avoiding spoilers, many of these anime are too short to avoid them, so keep that in mind. Either way, it doesn't matter because they're closer to expressions than stories, and I'm just sharing my perspective, and you can share yours via the comments. We begin today's video with Tales of the Street Corner, one of the 2 introductory Tezuka shorts. Ironically, our first anime isn't much of a short considering its 40-minute runtime. Instead of following the trends of epic fables or grand adventures, its scope is much smaller, focusing on a single alleyway, injecting anthropomorphic animals and posters with as much life as possible. The entire premise of Tales of the Street Corner is that the alleyway symbolizes societal change in relation to stimuli such as dictatorships and war. It begins showing animated posters, joyfully dancing in tandem with the music until the dictator arrives, gradually transforming everything into propaganda pieces. The anime remains focused on the small, from its lively posters to cinematography choices such as keeping its camera low as cars and pedestrians pass by. Overall, I think Tales of the Street Corner was expertly crafted, featuring experienced animators from previous Toei works, namely its key animator Gisaburo Sugi. One of my favorite aspects of 50s and 60s anime movies were their textured backgrounds, and the same is true here. They really put the paint knife to work, and thankfully its HD remaster allows us to appreciate every inconsistent gap of paint. My only complaint is that the anime feels a bit longer than necessary unless you're focused on the minor details or enjoying its classical music. Our next work, Osu, or Male, is more of what you'd expect from an experimental short because it's a 3-minute anime that's mostly pitch black. In contrast to Tales of the Street Corner, utilizing typically insignificant background aspects, Osu's intentionally bare-bones presentation tells a story through illusion. Basically, you're in a dark room with a man and his cat, and you're given the context of picture fragments and sounds to piece it together in your mind. While original, it doesn't work out that way as its ending is nothing you would have expected, but that's part of the enjoyment too. 1964's 5-minute short Memory takes a step in yet another direction as a lighthearted and comical take on our memories. Why do we remember certain events and forget others? Why do our memories take liberties with our experiences and turn everything into naked women? Despite enjoying the others, Memory was the most fun I had with a Tezuka short so far because it comically discusses the subject matter with its avant-garde and multimedia visuals. Similar to Osu, this one also has a wild and trippy, yet refreshing ending. Mermaid is an 8-minute short about Tezuka's views on how Japanese culture at the time stifled creativity. It follows a boy who falls in love with a fish, imagining it's a beautiful mermaid. Of course, society doesn't accept his decision and forcefully tries to shoehorn him back into a state of normalcy. It's a prime example of the nail that sticks out gets hammered down, which might relate with Tezuka's experiences of being beaten by his elementary school teacher for drawing manga. 1965's Tobacco and Ash is somewhat reminiscent of the latter half of George Orwell's Animal Farm. It depicts farm animals subjugating each other for profit. Here, caged hens revolt against their rooster overlords, desperate to secure their freedom and rescue their eggs, sparking a foul brawl. Of course, similar to Animal Farm, their real accomplishment wasn't freedom, instead a respite from objectification, as temptation eventually perpetuates past crimes. Although it could have better highlighted its morals by being longer than 4 minutes, it's concise enough to convey its point while adding a few new ideas with its unexpected ending. Shizuku, or The Drop, is a short but sweet anime following the struggles of a man adrift at sea, suffering from dehydration and hunger. Although it's only 4 minutes and pretty straightforward, they creatively represent the subjective value of things. In this instance, all the babes and diamonds in the world are worthless compared to a single drop of water. It's another shade of Tezuka's occasionally dark sense of humor that's just fun to watch. Pictures at an Exhibition is a 30-minute anime inspired by Mussorgsky's 1874 piece by the same name. Admittedly, I know little about art or music, so I didn't find the original all that interesting. However, I preferred Tezuka's vision. These chapters represent different characters and their pitfalls, each with a uniquely appropriate aesthetic and score. For example, the owner of a large factory endlessly optimizes until things get out of hand and he's slowly absorbed into the machine. Its heartless and profit-driven themes are complemented by its brutalist animation. There's also the primitive chicken scratch animation depicting the ugliness of our unending desire for beauty as a plastic surgeon shaves and bashes women into the physical embodiment of their insecurities. However, my favorite was The Journalist, since it's relatable considering what I do on YouTube. Plus, he kinda looks like me 4 years ago. The Journalist rapidly consumes various works, flippantly dismissing them despite clearly not giving due diligence. He's clearly self-absorbed, motivated by ego, and isn't concerned with the pursuit of his craft or the experiences it provides. Although he seems fairly knowledgeable, his application is skewed due to his lack of actual experience. While I don't care for drawing modern morals from older works, I make exceptions in cases of basic human nature, and that's what's expressed in this anime, so it's applicable today and makes for a very thought-provoking experience. Soseki, or The Genesis, is a 1968 4-minute monochrome short parodying John Huston's 1966 3-hour epic, The Bible in the Beginning. It's basically a fun and sarcastic jab at the movie saying, hey, that cost nearly $20 million? Look at what I can do with spare change. They even managed to incorporate their low budget into its central themes. A good comparison would be when the original blows away a small lottery winning to depict creation. Meanwhile, Soseki is a blank black void fading into a literal piece of sushi. Frugality is the name of the game. 80% of the short comprises static images. The few that were animated appeared to be reused scenes from earlier anime, like Astro Boy. Despite their budgetary restraints, the static images feature imaginative monsters as this alternate creation unfolds. And by alternate, I mean Adam was created from Eve's boobs, so there's some crude humor in the mix as well. There's also Osamu Tezuka's The Bible in the Beginning, a 26-episode anime requested by the Vatican and produced in partnership with Italian biblical experts for the sake of accuracy. Although Tezuka was also not Christian, he accepted the request, working on planning, composition, and character design. Unfortunately, Tezuka was unable to see the project through to completion as he passed from stomach cancer in 1989. Thankfully, Osamu Dezaki became its director and storyboard artist, so he left it in safe hands. Considering it aired in January 1997, the anime is clearly a massive project worthy of anyone's attention, regardless of your faith. Taking a leap from 1968 to 1984, we have Jumping, an experimental anime that truly lives up to both names. It's just about a character jumping through the city, yet it's my favorite from today's video and the one you should watch the most. It seems inspired by Furenzo Rofu's 1980 animated short The Fly, giving us the viewpoint of a fly buzzing through the forest and someone's home. However, what's impressive about this Hungarian animation is the illusion of a 3D environment saturated with texture, maintaining consistency with its ever-changing vantage point. However, the original idea for jumping was much different and more grotesque, considering Tezuka wanted to show the perspective of food as it's eaten, digested, and comes out the other end. While I'd like to see this wild interpretation of our viscera, likely complete with aliens and other unexpected life forms, I'm glad the idea evolved to what we have today. While jumping isn't the first anime to offer shifting vantage points, it is the first to make perspective its primary focus. So much so that these 6 minutes took 2 years to make and involved a huge scale model for its animator Junji Kobayashi to work its angles out. Additionally, its audio perfectly complements its visual prowess by filling space with pure ambiance instead of music. As a result, you're teleported into the moment as you hear footsteps, cars, rustling leaves, and much more. Of course, the important aspect is the jumping, and every leap delivers a believable whoosh. What makes jumping a total package is that it's not just an experimental art piece sailing by its creative presentation alone. There's actually a deeper meaning, as it represents societal evolution as the jumper moves from a dirt road rural town through a sprawling city and eventually into war. If everything so far doesn't compel you to watch Jumping and share it with your friends, it's also loaded with Easter eggs, giving it rewatch value because you won't catch it all your first time. Before moving on, I have a few similar recommendations. Jumping was animated by Junji Kobayashi. Although I've seen his other projects, the most significant similarity was 4 years earlier in Hinotori 2772 with his beautiful shot overlooking a futuristic city. I'd also like to recommend some of Ferentz's other animated works. Similar to The Fly, 1982's Deadlock gives a front row seat to a firing squad. Although its tone is totally different, it's even more atmospheric than his previous work. On a much creepier note, he also animated 1984's Gravity. It's only 3 minutes long, but it definitely left a strong impression. Back to the despair felt in Deadlock, the 8-minute 2003 animation Ceasefire depicts the horrors of war as a boy is left to fend for himself after his family is taken by soldiers. If you'd like to watch any of these, which I recommend you do, I've added their YouTube links to the video description. Prior to watching early anime, I repeatedly overlooked 1985's Onboro, aka Broken Down. Its cover art created the impression that it's a relic from a forgotten era and probably wasn't worth watching. Thankfully, my recent experiences broadened my horizons enough to give it a chance, and I'm glad I did. Instead of an outdated imitation of 1930s American cartoons, I discovered a self-aware and stylistic comedy that's whole purpose is to break the fourth wall. Here, a cowboy wanders across the desert on his horse, stumbling across a damsel in distress, helplessly tied down on the train tracks. It's up to him to rescue her before her imminent demise. However, there's a few obstacles standing between him and his future love. Not only must he contend with an oncoming train and the bandit who originally tied her down, but there's an unforeseen complication: film defects. Its creators closely observe poorly preserved 30s cartoons, contemplating ways of turning its defects into physical objects. For example, the vertical film rolls become platforms our hero uses to evade his enemy, or when the film breaks, causing his horse to trip. This style of clever parody saturates the entire anime, making for a short burst of nostalgia and humor. Maybe it won't be nostalgic for you, but it was for me because I had several of these on VHS as a kid, and it reminded me of Popeye saving Olive from a similar situation. 1987's Push is a short but powerful allegory for our instant gratification culture that's even more relevant today. It opens on what appears to be a soldier driving through the desert, buying water from an ordinary vending machine. As he continues his journey, he discovers one vending machine after another, gradually upgrading his lifestyle. From clothes to cars and even mechanical pets, there's nothing he can't buy. However, the end of the road offers the greatest vending machines imaginable. Here, you can buy almost anything your heart desires. Our protagonist asks the heavenly clerk for a new, better Earth, but is denied, stating that the wrong button was already pressed. I was thoroughly impressed by how efficiently Push illustrates the consequences of rabid consumer culture. You see, the anime opens on what appears to be a soldier driving along the desert, but it's not a desert at all. Instead, it's a ravaged Earth, depleted of everything to provide this push-button lifestyle. Next is an anime with the most complicated backstory from today's video. At 30 minutes, it's only half the intended runtime, containing the first and last acts of its 4-act narrative. Each act follows different characters with the same themes of showing the world through the perspective of bugs and wild animals. Its premise is pretty straightforward, taken from his Momonga no Musa chapter in his Lion Books manga, so you might not even notice that it's incomplete because they're standalone. They're both about animals struggling to save their families and homes as loggers tear down their forest. As for its art, it's actually the deepest part of the anime, representing the evolution of American animation. It's basically Tezuka's visual homage to Western animation that was so inspirational to him in the past. Considering the highly detailed backgrounds and the fluidly animated and expressive characters, if I were shown these clips out of context, I'd think they belong to separate, well-produced, high-budget movies. It's no surprise considering Junji Kobayashi, Yoshiaki Kawajiri, and other seasoned animators were on staff. Unfortunately, the anime wasn't completed due to its director Osamu Tezuka's passing. Thankfully, 26 years later, his son Makoto Tezuka brought life to his father's notes by directing and storyboarding Mori no Densetsu Dai ni Gakusho. Of course, it follows a different visual flow than the original considering how much time has passed. In contrast to the environmental themes of the original, it focuses on the duality of nature and how its beauty is mirrored by danger. The story follows two dragonfly lovers struggling to survive in the forest. Again, there's not much to the story, and its presentation takes the forefront. I don't think I've ever seen anything like its introduction. They perfectly emulated the layered cell aesthetic of a multiplane camera, but because it's the 2010s, they can play with a third dimension by tilting the camera and flying through leaves. There's so much detail that the edges of each layer look like painted paper cutouts. There's so much going on here that it quickly distracts from its plot, giving it fairly high rewatch value. Every time I watch it, I notice new movement and detail that I missed before. Next up is Jigazo, or Self-Portrait, a 1988 12-second animation for the international animation community. It's basically a slot machine of faces landing on Tezuka in the end, and it's just as simple as it sounds. Sadly, 1987's Muramasa was the only one I didn't like, which might be controversial considering it's liked by others. The only thing I enjoyed was its background art. Just look at it. It's beautiful and lively, so much more than the characters. So the whole gimmick here is that they feature Japanese papercraft artist Hyakimaru as the special character designer. Now, while I don't have examples of his other work from the 1980s, he's still at it, and this is what his art looks like now, and he is a tremendous artist. However, I don't care for the characters in Muramasa. They just are very bland. They look like extras in a Zatoichi movie. Secondly, I don't think they were drawn all that well. And lastly, they are barely animated. And I guess that's fine, but it just feels like somebody went to all this work to make the backgrounds as beautiful as possible, and then somebody injected an amateur Kamishibai play into it where it's just like static images and paper, and it really holds everything back. It feels like they might have had more elaborate plans that fell through and they just settled on this. Consider the potential of Hyakimaru's paper cutouts as moving characters. I know it's a lot of work, but if they could do it in an anime like Madame Butterfly's Illusion in the 1940s, they could certainly do it in the late 80s. I think that would also compensate for its bland and generic story. If you're familiar with the name, you already know what's going to happen. The Legend of Muramasa is famous and it's been retold countless times. Ironic because one of those times was in Tezuka's earlier work, Dororo. Both the anime and the manga did a better job of portraying a samurai possessed by a demonic sword on a rampage. What's supposed to be experimental here? Everything has already been done. The only thing that it does different is looping the beginning and ending to imply the perpetuity of bloodshed. For the record, I don't hate it, I'm just disappointed because it's the least creative thing out of today's video, and yeah, parts of it look good, but like if I were to score it, I'd give it 4 or 4.5, just because I've seen a lot worse, but I was pretty disappointed. However, if you're wondering why I didn't score anything else in today's video, I feel like it defeats the purpose because they are experimental works, but for the sake of convenience, I will list them in order that I enjoyed them. So here you go if you want to watch them. If you'd like to watch them or any of the supplementary recommendations, I have their YouTube links in the video description. Just keep in mind that the experimental anime uploaded to the Tezuka YouTube channel are in standard definition and a lot of them have been cut short, but I will tell you which ones are the full length and which ones are cut shorter in the video description. Also check out the other recommendations. So anyways, thanks to all the channel supporters for Patreon donations and a special thanks to Nia-chan. If you'd like to support these videos, check out Patreon or my Etsy store linked in the video description. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon when I rank every 1960s movie as another part of my beginner's guide to 1960s anime. See you then.